Welcome, I'm AF7RV, Tim, secretary, and also player of technology sometimes. That is when I can afford it and I have the time. And what I'm going to talk about today, I call it off the grid, because I'm trying really hard to be as independent as I can, you know, should the ugliness happen. That is, if we lose power and Rainier cooks and earthquakes and all the orcas leave or something. I just want to make sure I'm ready for it. So, moving on. Which is which? There we go. So what's the point? I wanted to operate a 100-watt rig independently of the power grid, if at all possible. Of course, it's a hobby that I can enjoy with a, feeling really well that I've got a zero carbon footprint. And I also want to understand how much power my transceiver really uses. And I'll tell you what, it's not 100 watts. So first of all, I have to determine the power requirement. How much do we need? How big solar cells? Do I need a whole roof full of these things, or will something fit in my pocket work? I need a solar charging controller, because you can't hook the controller directly to a battery. Something will break if you try. I want to know the minimum and optimum solar power packages that I have to choose from. And at the very end, I'm going to show you exactly what I settled on and why. So first of all, the rig. It's an ICOM IC7200. It operates on HF and on 6-meter bands. I also need a computer to log all my contacts. If I'm working digital, of course, you need a computer, period, whether you log contacts or not. I chose a 420 for this job because it's a pretty simple machine. It doesn't do anything fancy. There's no special drivers, and it's built like a tank because it's a business machine. And of course, I've got my antenna, which really has nothing to do with the power requirement. I just thought I'd throw it in. So what do we need to know? We need to know what we're operating, because the different modes use different power. They require different power. So in this case, I'm choosing SSB, which we talk to mostly on voice anyway, digital or a combination. You can also throw CW in here, but it wouldn't really make a whole lot of difference. Not for power consumption. You need to know your current draw, and you need to know how long you're going to be transmitting or receiving. And you also need an operating schedule. You're going to operate during the day, you're going to operate at night, and you also want to know how much useful daylight you have to charge your battery. So the power requirement I determined using, the usual meters. My transceiver on receive utilizes about 1.1 amp. Now, if you don't have any meters, just look in the sales brochure that came with your rig. You should be able to at least get an estimate, because all of this is estimate. There's so many variables in here, all you can do is just make a rough guess and run with it. So on transmit, on SSB at 100 watts, I use about 12 amps. On digital, which is at 50 watts, I use about 15 amps. And the difference is, with SSB, the only time you're really consuming power is when you actually have voice going to the mic. You're consuming some, but not a lot. But when you're actually talking, that's when the power goes off the antenna. With digital, different story. It's on or it's off. There's no variability. And of course, my computer itself uses 1.2 amps continuous, because it's just charging the internal battery. So to calculate the current, you need to know the percentage of the time you're receiving and how much current you draw when you're receiving. And you got to know how much current you're drawing when you're transmitting and the percentage of time you're going to be transmitting. And of course, you got to know how many hours you're going to be operating. So for SSB at 100 watts, I found out that I draw 2.3 amps. That's including the computer. I added them together because the computer's on all the time. I'm using 2.3 amps, and I'm listening about 3/4 of the time, that is receiving, and I'm transmitting about 1/4 of the time, 25%. And when I'm transmitting on SSB, I'm using 12 amps. So you add the receiving power requirement to the transmit requirement, and you multiply it times 8. That means that on SSB, you're drawing about 38 amps for an 8-hour day. On digital, at 50 watts, you're drawing much more. Of course, the duty cycle changes too, because you're listening half the time and you're transmitting half the time, especially if you're using FT8 or JT65, what have you. On PSK31, it's a little bit different, but I don't even play with that one anymore. It's just too hard. So anyway, half the time I'm at 2.3 amps, half the time it's 16.2 amps, and over an 8-hour period, I'm drawing 74 amps of power. So since I'm not doing both one or the other, I'm actually combining the two, I need to find a happy medium, and we'll get to that. So the battery is what actually powers your equipment. The solar array charges the battery. You're not drawing current directly off the solar array into your rig. It just wouldn't work. It draws too much power. There's too much variability. Automobile batteries won't work. The kind you need is a deep cycle. A deep cycle battery uses heavier plates. It holds more current, but it expends the current more slowly than an automobile battery. An automobile battery is designed to produce a lot of current at one time, that is, to get your car started, and then the rest of the time it's just sitting around getting charged. So if you use an automobile battery, it'll have power, a great deal of power for a very short period of time, and then it just drops right off. So you want to use deep cycle. You also want to use no more than 60% of the rated capacity. So if you're going to be drawing 60 amp, or if you got a 100 amp hour battery, you don't want to draw any more than 60 amps. Because if you do, you drain the battery down too far and you greatly shorten its life. So how do you estimate how much capacity you have? You do that by the volts that you can see on the meter. So if you're 100% charged, your battery is saying it's got 12.7 volts. When you're getting down to 40%, you're down to 11.9 volts. Now this is the resting voltage. If you're watching the voltmeter and you're keying the mic or even have the radio on, of course the voltage is going to go down a little more than that because your battery is busy shooting power out the door. However, if you stop transmitting for a minute, wait for the voltage to stabilize, that's the level that you're going to use to determine your capacity, how much battery you've got, how much charge you got left. So on SSB, you have a 20% duty cycle, which we talked about. You figured out what your power requirements are, and then you divide that by 60 to get your useful capacity. So if you have 37.8 amps, and you're going to be using only 60% of that, you divide it by 0.6. That means you need a battery capacity of at least 63 amp hours. That's to operate for an 8-hour period. If you're operating shorter than that, you don't need as much battery, but I'm using 8 as a standard here. For digital, of course, it's much more. You have a 50% duty cycle. If you're going to use only 60% of the battery at 74 amp hours, you need a 124 amp hour battery minimum to operate for an 8-hour period. You also need a pretty beefy radio because digital produces a lot of heat in your radio because the duty cycle is much different than it is for SSB. So you need at least 124 amp hours to operate for 8 hours. Now we know how much battery we need based on how much current our radios draw. Now here's the kind of batteries that you can consider. First is the flooded kind, that is the wet cell. It's the same kind as an automobile battery except the plates are thicker, it's deep cycle. They are less expensive. They're meant to be bolted down on something stable because the electrolyte can spill out if the battery dumps over, or if you're operating at an angle, or if it's jostling around in, I don't know, the trunk of your car or something. It can spill, and it also requires maintenance. But it is the cheapest option. Absorbed glass mat is another option. The electrolyte is actually encased in fiberglass inside the battery itself. It keeps the electrolyte in contact with the plates, but it doesn't slosh around. You can operate with the battery on its side, you can operate with the battery upside down. It's much safer to use, but it also has a shorter useful life than a regular wet cell. And of course there's lithium iron phosphate. Everybody would love one of these batteries, however you need some pretty deep pockets to get it. To operate at the capacity we need, we're going to be spending a lot of money for a light bulb. They weigh less, they're more stable, they last longer. However, they do have a serious disadvantage. I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, AGM is heavier and larger than a gel cell. A gel cell battery is similar to an AGM, except it uses a gelling compound. I can't even remember what it is, to hold the electrolyte in contact with the plates. See, with the flooded, of course, we talked about the electrolyte spillage risk. And the LiPo is ideal, but it costs a lot of money. Wow, this is touchy. Okay, you also need to package the battery in something. You just don't want the battery by itself because it's really hard to carry around. You also risk contacting both the poles, and that would not be pretty. Yeah, you might become the fuse. So you want a polypropylene battery box because it's acid resistant, and you want to use it if it's not permanently mounted in an RV. It also lets you carry it around a little bit. You want to use short runs of wire because the longer your runs or the smaller gauge of wire you use, the more voltage drop you're going to get. And you want to have as much voltage as possible available to the radio. So at a minimum, you want 10 AWG. I just use gauge, I guess, because I can't remember what AWG stands for.
American wire gauge.
Thank you. For 47 amps, that is continuous going through the wiring, and you want at least 12 AWG for wiring up to 36 amps. The longer the wire, the more voltage you're going to drop, so remember that. Also, each device needs a fuse when you're operating off a battery, when you're operating off of anything. You want your radio to have a fuse. You want any kind of devices you might plug into the battery to have a fuse as well. That's safety. So here's some examples. A 73 amp hour gel battery is 55 pounds, it's about 240 bucks. An 80 amp hour AGM battery is a little bit cheaper than that, but it's also a little bit heavier than that. We're talking 66 pounds. A 130 amp flooded lead acid battery is 50 pounds, costs a little less. And of course, a 100 amp hour LiPo battery is anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500. So if you got really deep pockets, go ahead and get one of those guys. If you're like the rest of us, you're going to be stuck with lead acid. Charge controller. You need a charge controller between your solar array and your battery, because this will regulate the current going to the battery, and it also keeps the battery from discharging if you don't have any light hitting your solar cells. Because whichever device has the higher voltage, that's what's going to be pushing voltage into one device or the other. So the controller keeps that from happening. You also want to prevent overcharging, because you're going to get hydrogen gas if you have a flooded wet cell battery, and you also reduce your battery life if you overcharge it. So the minimum charging voltage for the gel cell is 14.1 volt. For the AGM, it's 14.4, and for the LiPo, it's 14.6. Once again, the controller controls all this stuff for you.
Minimum or maximum?
Pardon me?
Maximum voltage or minimum voltage?
Maximum. You can go minimum voltage if you like. It's just going to take longer to charge your battery. So here's how charging works. If you have a battery that's almost dead, you're going to get just kind of a little trickle of voltage until it gets to about 3 volts. Once it hits 3 volts, then you're going to get full charge from whatever your device is that's charging your battery, up to the point where it reaches its capacity. It's called the absorption stage. You have steady voltage, and the amperage trickles down as the battery charges, and then you have float, which is basically, it's like a trickle charger for your car. You know, it just keeps the battery alive. It keeps the charge up. The different types of controllers, you have a pulse width modulated. It's the least expensive. It's also the least sophisticated. It'll charge a battery for a small station. It's not as efficient as the next kind, the maximum power point tracking. However, it is much less expensive. The MPPTs, they're about 4 times more expensive. Those are for like houses. I mean, if you're going to be setting up your house for solar power, then you'd want an MTTP, because that would justify the cost, because you're actually saving money if you're more efficient. But for a station that's 100 watts for radio, just get a PMG. Solar panels, there's 2 different kinds. There's monocrystalline, which are more efficient. They take 22% of the energy that's hitting it, that is the sunlight, and converting that into electricity. And you also have the polycrystalline, which is less expensive, but it's also less efficient. It's only 14 to 16% efficient. And you can tell how they look. The monocrystalline, they've got these circles all over the place, because they're cut directly from silicon that's been grown in a lab, and they're just slices of silicon. The polycrystalline is not as well refined. However, it is less expensive. So, your capacity for your solar array. How much solar panel do you really need? Well, with SSB, your duty cycle is 25%. Once again, that varies quite a bit. You need 63 amp hours for 8 hours of operation. That is, it has to replace 63 amp hours of juice that comes out of your battery. And at 7.9 amps at 128 volts, you're going to need a 100-watt solar array. For digital, once again, it's going to use a lot more power. In fact, almost twice the power. So you're going to need a 200-watt solar array. So now we know how much solar array we need, that is how big the panels are supposed to be. We know what kind of battery we need. What's next? Well, we can start putting together a package. So you're going to need a battery box. Say about a Group 27 would work for this. You can get it at West Marine or just about any auto parts store. You need a deep cycle flooded marine battery. That's the minimum that you're going to need. Say 90 amp hour, and that's about 200 bucks. And you can get a Coleman 100-watt solar panel at Costco for about 160 bucks. So for about 380 bucks, you can get together a solar package. Bare minimum. Or you can build your own for even cheaper if you're that good at it. A powerful solar package. You're going to have a bigger battery, you're going to have a bigger solar array. So your polypropylene box, of course, is about the same, but it's a Group 31, which is bigger. Your battery is going to be heavier, and your solar panel is going to be much more expensive. In this case, we have the Great Solar 200-watt solar panel kit. You get that from Home Depot. That's almost 600 bucks. You need the deep cycle battery, of course, which is almost 300 bucks. It's rated for 125 amp hour, but it weighs 75 pounds. So if you got a good back, go ahead and get one of those. So, based on all this, what did I decide to do? Oops. First of all, I got to tell you what I need. a little more than what I just talked about. This is more than just electrical capacity. We also have the human element in here. You're looking at the bonehead idiot right here that can't manage himself. So I needed to accommodate for that. So I wanted, of course, I want to charge with a power supply or a solar array. Reason being is that Washington State, you don't have a lot of sun all the time, but you want to keep your battery conditioned, you want to keep it running. So if you hook it into your power supply and then run your radio off the battery, you're keeping the current flowing in and out. That's good for your battery. I want to operate for at least 6 hours. 8 hours would be better. I want to work both SSB and digital. I want to set up everything without any tools. I don't have to deal with screwdrivers or wrenches or nut drivers or any of that. And I want the components that are exposed to weather to be resistant to weather. I want them waterproof. The solar panel and the controller, for example. I don't want water to get into it. I also want Anderson power pole connectors on everything because they're idiot-proof and they're really easy to put together. I want it moved by one person. I need a power distribution system because I'm going to operate more than just the radio on this thing. Remember, I got a computer. I want to monitor the battery condition, and once again, I want to make it stupid resistant. I want to make it really hard to cross-polarize my battery with my charger or my radio with my battery. And believe me, it can be done. And I also want low voltage shut-off. I don't want it to kill my battery while I'm not thinking. Okay, I'm operating like crazy, I'm taking notes, I'm on the computer doing whatever. I want the thing to shut down when it's time to shut down. And if that means it cuts me off, it cuts me off. But I want it idiot-proof. I'll get to that in a minute. So the first thing I got was a 73 amp hour gel cell deep cycle battery. I chose this particular one for a couple of reasons. I got it from the same company I got everything else from. But also I can lift it. It's only 55 pounds. It's easy to manage. It's 74 amp hour, which is completely enough to operate independently on SSB, but I can't operate digital with a slight deficit, so that's a compromise I made. I also used the Super PowerGate PG40S controller. Well, actually, this is part of the controller. This is the part that'll plug into a regular power supply and keep my battery charged up. It'll keep it topped off. And it also supplies power to the power distribution system. And they're Anderson power poles. Once again, it's idiot-proofed. I got the Rig Runner 4007U power distribution panel. This hooks directly into the power gate through the port, oh, there we go, the port all the way over here in the side. That's what the power gate connects to, and I can operate on all of these ports right here. Not that I would, I mean it would drain my battery pretty quick. However, you notice every port is fused right here. If the fuse blows, I can't use it anymore. It also has a USB port right here. So if I want to charge my phone, as assuming phones will still work, I can still charge with USB. It also has automatic shut-off. If the voltage gets down to 11 volts on transmit, okay, so I'm above what the 40% would be, but if I hit transmit and the voltage drops because I'm transmitting, if it goes below 11 volts, it shuts the radio off. It's exactly what I need to keep from stepping on myself. So it comes in a package that's actually cheaper than the individual components. I can also lift this thing without hurting myself. Here's the power gate here, here's the power distribution panel mounted on a battery box. Now you can buy components individually and mount them to any battery box you want. I mean, if you want a 200 amp hour battery, you're going to need a bigger box, of course. But this is just one example. And I have the Renogy 100 watt solar suitcase. I like this because it's idiot proof and it's also waterproof. I'll set it up here in a minute. This has the monocrystalline solar cells in it, which I talked about before. It is waterproof. I don't know if I throw it in a swimming pool, but it'll certainly put up with the rain. And RNG International sells it for about 300 bucks. Once again, you can go cheaper if you build it yourself. It also provides 7 amp hours, 7 amps per hour, 42 amp hours a day, and that's assuming 6 hours of direct sunlight. Summertime here, of course, we get more, and the wintertime we get less. However, that's adequate for my needs. And of course, the solar power connection. You can see this later on, but they're power poles, they're Anderson power poles. They're also different colors. So I'm not going to do something really stupid and hook up the solar array onto this power controller with another controller attached to it. Something will break or burn up. So, to keep me from doing something silly, I've coated the connectors on the solar array with the solar connector on the battery. Okay, so altogether, 240 bucks for the battery, 270 for the battery box, and the power distribution panel, and the basically a UPS controller. with the solar suitcase, solar array, came to $804. Can you go cheaper? Yeah, you sure can. But this one, you can charge it with regular power supply to use it during the day, or when you're not using a solar array. Your out goes directly into, there we go, directly into the power distribution panel, and of course the power distribution panel plugs into all kinds of different things. And here's the sources. Any questions?
Tim, go back, you probably said it, are you using, which radio are you plugged into?
200?
Oh, the 72?
Yeah. Well, the 7200, I brought this thing along simply because it's a lot lighter than my 7200 is. But all the measurements I made, all the current draws and so forth, were done on the 7200. The 857? 857, you can never remember that.
857.
Thank you. The 857 doesn't draw as much current, okay, because it is a smaller rig. The 7200 does, it's just bigger. But the 7200 handles digital a lot better simply because it's got a big old heat sink on the back end of it so I can operate longer.
And the interface is built in.
The interface, oh yeah, the interface is built in too. That helps too. I don't need the signal link. For charging it right off the grid, to keep the battery up, standard power supply, once again with Anderson power pole connectors, connects directly into the box, and I can charge it up. Also, it will not release energy from the battery into the power supply. Very helpful. You don't want to burn anything up. If you give me a minute, we can set this thing up.
Absolutely.
Can you
Sure.
farm it?
How physically robust is your, I'll call it your solar suitcase, your array?
Well, I don't know if I drop it down the stairs or not.
Well, I'm just saying, it's, if you were carrying it someplace and then for some whatever reason you happen to drop it.
I don't know, I haven't dropped it. Maybe it'll work. But it's a pretty simple beast. All it is a solar array on one end, has a controller on the other.
Yeah, okay.
It's got standard RV connections right here. Standard RV connections, they hook into the Anderson power pole connectors. It has a stand on it. Now, if you run into a hailstorm or something like that, you always throw a blanket over it. Or if for some reason you got to cut power to it, throw a blanket over it. That'll do it too. There is no off-on switch. The off-on switch is the sun hitting the panel. Okay, so it sets up pretty cleanly. Yeah, I have had this wet before by accident. It seemed to work okay.
And the follow-on question is, and this would be experiential for you, HF noise,
None.
really?
None. Nothing.
The power gauge.
Totally silent. Well, also, I don't have this right next to my radio. I mean, the thing is sitting, away from it. I've got enough lead. Golly, I've got all of this. So,
Electronically, those features are pretty clean because they're running more on an inverter type setup rather than a generator type setup. So you're just converting.
Well,
in this case, you're not even inverting the power. You're just filtering DC to DC.
pretty much.
Some of the controllers will introduce
Yeah,
noise.
PWM, there's gotta be noise.
It just depends on frequency and
Because
filtration.
the
I haven't
review
heard it.
so far for homeowners with residential solar alternatives is for HF operation is basically forget it. You shut down your solar system if you want to operate HF because there's such noise generation going on. I'm just wondering, particularly since this is distributed via West Mountain Radio, which is a purely amateur dealer, that something magical has occurred in the design to reduce that problem.
Well, the controller's not West Mountain, it's part of the Renergy.
I can
Well,
tell
I
you
understand
this.
that, but it's being marketed
Yeah.
through.
The household powers once one for one thing, so you're gonna have an inverter which generates a lot more.
Okay.
And MPPTs are noisy. because
Maybe
they-
talk about switch to LTEs.
Yeah, go ahead.
So-
Doug has an alternative.
Running solar,
So I
think they're a lot dirtier.
I knew Tim was talking about, so I thought, well, I'll bring a panel that I built myself. I built 4 of these, Because I go to the desert and camp out on the desert, and so I keep 2 big deep cycles charged with 4 panels and through a controller. And I'm not very math savvy, so I just didn't do the math. I just built a bunch of panels and ran it through a charge controller. And because the charge controller takes care of the overcharging issue on the battery, and I just want to make sure I have plenty of solar power. But to answer your question, I go down and operate HF all the time with my 4 panels and through a controller, and I don't have an issue with noise. Yeah. Now, I don't know if it's just happens to be that controller doesn't make a lot of noise. I'm not sure, but anyway. And these, I built this now several years ago, or these several years ago, and they're you can't believe I can build them. So they're very easy to build. You just build a frame, put a piece of glass down, solder these are the monocrystalline, I think.
Are those mono or those polys?
Polys, sorry, polycrystalline.
Yeah, those are polys.
Polycrystallines, and you can buy them from eBay in a package. And this is a 60-watt panel, puts out about 3.5 amps. And the only thing about doing these is these polycrystalline little cells are extremely fragile. They're very, very thin. You can take one and hold your hand, go like that, and it'll just shatter.
Wow.
But anyway, you just put them, lay them out onto your glass frame, and then they provide a product. It's a silicone product that's very slow in curing. And you lay this down on a flat surface, pour the silicone in on the back within your frame, and in here it fills in, and over time, just let it sit. Over time, it takes care of the front of the solar cell itself, and so it's all adhered to the glass, which is this tempered glass. Anyway, easy to make, and like Tim said, you can do it cheaper, but you know, it's kind of bulky to take down to the desert, frankly, and if I had the ability to get something that was a rollout thing, eventually, I would like to have that. But the price is really coming down on solar, so I don't even know if I could build one of these anymore that's a 60-watt panel.